My name is John Tarn. I was a rotary wing captain with Air America during the period 1 September 1965 through August 31, 1968. I dedicate this tape to my flight mechanic, James H. Hope, and my friend Mike Jarena, also a rotary wing captain with Air America for a considerably longer period of time than I was. We had known each other prior to arriving in Udorn. This is the Civil Air Transport aircraft that flew us down into the Bangkok area. This aircraft ran between Japan and Singapore on a daily basis. Extremely reliable. Business travelers that used this aircraft would tell you that they had many more aircraft than just the single aircraft that they had. When we arrived we were met in Tokyo, and then we were flown everything first class. We were flown initially down to Taipei for an introduction. These are two of the aircraft that I saw, a PBY Catalina and a Stearman in the background. This is the Civil Air Transport office building in Taipei. It's a very impressive building with its gold trim, printing, and so on. This was our introduction, and where we received a day or two of briefing on what we were to encounter in Southeast Asia. We were introduced to some of the holding companies. Pacific Holding Company was one I specifically remember. This was the main entrance into the Air America Civil Air Transport part of the building. Very impressive entrance with its gold and jade coloring. Our briefing lasted 1 to 2 days, as I recall, and we were introduced to some of the local customs and things that we might encounter when we were settled in our final domicile. This is a scene in Hong Kong, and directly ahead of us is the ferry that went between Hong Kong and Kowloon. Hong Kong, Kowloon was a very favored R&R recreation spot for Air America personnel. Had some very memorable trips there. This is a main street in Udorn. It was interesting to note that after 90 days, the company paid to bring our wives and family over to there, and I had my family there with me for basically 2 years and 9 months. We thoroughly enjoyed it. This is another street in the main street of Udorn. Just south of the town was the Air America compound, which was located on the Thai Air Force Base of Udorn. Subsequently, largely built up into an American facility to which a lot of our F-105 and other strike aircraft took off for their missions over North Vietnam and Laos. This is an upcountry picture of a woman that's cooking fish over an open fire there, and she was just like a little restaurant right alongside the road there. I thought it was interesting the way she had the fish impaled on the little cooking sticks that she had there. This is a scene in Vientiane in the local market. I don't know what all they've got there, but one of the things I used to get in the open market was pomelos for about 1 baht, or about a nickel. And these were a grapefruit with a thick rind of about 1.5 inches, and they were just great to take on our upcountry trips because it supplied water. This is Bill Yarbar at the Air America Chalet in Sam Tong, which is otherwise known as Lima Site 20. This was our favorite place to come back every night. We could get a good meal, a warm, hot shower, and a nice place to sleep in, quote, relative safety. This is another shot of the facility, and this just south of this, to the left of the picture, was a USAID hospital. Pop Buell used to work here. I should mention that Pop Buell, I used to fly him quite a bit around in the helicopter, and I also presided with the I gave the eulogy for his funeral back in Indiana. Can't remember the year. Here we have a caribou taking off from Site 20, and my helicopter is just to the left there, an H-34. It's interesting to note that these aircraft, even though we had them up country, were immaculately maintained. I flew these helicopters for 3 years, almost 3,000 hours, and never heard one of them burp. This is Father Bouchard, and you can see the Jolly Green Giants in the back that, quote, quote, were not supposed to be in country. Father Bouchard, his call sign was Padre. We had orders, you could expect to hear from him anywhere. Padre, helicopter, so-and-so, tell you where you go in, we'd pick him up and transport him wherever you wanted to go. This is Site 20 again, with a Helio courier taking off. Helios were probably one of the mainstay of our light fixed wing, and probably did a lot of the work that were subsequently taken over by helicopters. These were a real workhorse, extremely talented pilots that flew them. When you saw the runways that they went into, uphill, downhill, and so on, it was just amazing. This was 20 alternate, or Long Chin. This was Vang Pao, General Vang Pao's headquarters, customer headquarters, and so on. Interesting approach to this was the cars that you see in front of us. The aircraft would come in from your left and land up, and then swing right around, accelerate with the load unlatched, and drop it. This is a picture in the inside the chalet. We have, I don't know all these fellas, but Dick Casterlin there is eating out of his bowl. Ex-Marine pilot, presently lives somewhere in the Baton Rouge, New Orleans area. Married a Thai wife. I believe her name was Tui. This is another shot. This is me here on the left. In the background there is Herb Baker, and we have Chuck Frady there on the right. Chuck was a ex-Army pilot, Baker was an ex-Marine, and I'm Navy. Should mention that the food was just excellent there. The pilots in Laos carried virtually everything, and I thought this was a particularly interesting picture here, because here I am carrying a bird, and it's he's tied to that suitcase there. You might almost say that bird has its own suitcase. We literally carried everything: pigs, baby elephants, hard rice, soft rice, you name it. This picture here is one of our Bell 205s. This pilot here was an ex-Army pilot, and to my knowledge is the only pilot in a helicopter to ever shoot down a fixed wing, and you'll see one of the fixed wing Russian aircraft that he shot down. The flight mechanic, as I remember, is McCafferty. I believe he was subsequently killed. This pilot, after shooting down the aircraft, was involved in some sort of an accident. I don't know what damage he did, but he was fired about 2 weeks after shooting the aircraft down, which is unusual. If he had been a Marine, this would have qualified him for management position. This is one of our flight mechanics. Again, I cannot recall the name, but the flight mechanics were absolutely essential to the safety of our operation there. They maintained our aircraft and flew many, many hours. This is Herb Baker, typically with his cigarette holder. I was flying as co-pilot on one of our riskier missions with him. Herb was an ex-Marine, excellent pilot. Always flew on the edge, but if you went down, he would be one that I would want to come in and get me. This is my friend Michael Jarina and myself. We're getting ready to go on some sort of a dual mission, and the aircraft behind us, and I'm showing him how to operate an M2 carbine, and I'm carrying a AK-47, and I don't know if you can see it, but I've got a bandolier of ammunition strung around my neck. This is another shot. Mike and I are close friends to this day. In fact, I just saw him about a week and a half ago. I'm presently driving a truck. I came out of retirement just for a little bit of kicks, and happened to be driving past Mike's place, and spent an hour or so with him before moving on to Miami. Here I am again on one of the upcountry, which is a typical Laotian scene. Notice the steepness of the hills. I'm carrying an AK-47. I should mention that my flight mechanic James Hope purchased this gun and about 1,000 rounds of ammunition for me, and he never did pay me for them. We were subsequently hit with a large caliber weapon blowing the aircraft up, and I watched listened to every one of those rounds cook off. This was one of the first missions that I was involved in as a new pilot with Air America. I'm not sure but who I was flying with. I think I was flying as a co-pilot at this time. This is a C-47 that made a hard landing, collapsed the gear and got the props, and they were typical Air America maintenance was just totally outstanding. They were reconstructing that aircraft in the field, and it did fly out. This is a Caribou. I don't know the site number, but as I recall the incident, this aircraft had one engine reverse and the other one didn't, and I recall that it may even have been in the air on final approach. The pilots were not hurt in this, as I understand. This is another shot of the same aircraft. The Caribou was an extremely versatile aircraft over there. The pilots like to fly it, but it happens to be one of the aircraft that I had my hairiest flight in when one engine quit, and they got that one going, the other one quit, and the aircraft was nursed around the pattern with alternate engines cutting out. Quite frankly, it scared the hell out of me. This is a pilot supporter. This is a Swiss aircraft with a PT-6, I believe, Lycoming turbine engine in it. This replaced to a large extent. It was faster, carry a bigger load. Replaced to some extent the Helio Courier. This is a T-28 flown by the Laotians. This is at Site 36 up in the extreme northeastern section of Laos, not real far out of North Vietnam. And this was on a strike mission, and somehow the pilot damaged it when he came in making an emergency landing. This is me again in front of my aircraft, and we have 3 of our quote soldiers. Well, one thing that you noticed after you'd been there for a while, that the death toll among the young men was so high that the recruits were getting younger and younger and younger. The U.S. Furnished these uniforms for these young men, and in typical seniority fashion, these young men, when they received their weapons, the weapons that were most commonly in use were the M1 rifle, not to be confused with the M1 and the M2 carbine. These young fellows generally fell heir to the M1 rifle, which the kick was enough to knock them about 3 feet backwards when they fired one, and the more senior soldiers always seemed to end up with the M1, the M2 carbine, which were lighter and didn't have the knockdown fire, but they did have the M2 particularly had a higher rate of fire. I mean, you just couldn't help but you know, be impressed by the these young men. You can see I've been operating in some pretty muddy conditions here if you look at the helicopter behind me. This is one of our flight mechanics. I can't recall his name, but I flew with him rather extensively. And again, I just can't say too much about the work ethic of these flight mechanics that flew about 2 to 3 times as many hours in a month as the pilots did, and they were up earlier and stayed out later maintaining these aircraft, and they just did one super job. This is a T-28 that was destroyed. In fact, there were a whole row of them destroyed. This was in Luang, Prabang, which was the royal capital of Laos, and we were staying at the French hotel there, and sappers came in and threw satchel charges under each one of these as we were getting ready to make a big push up the valley to the northeast there. This is in Luang Prabang. This is a typical morning scene where the monks are going to get their food offerings from the local populace. Right across from this was a little Chinese restaurant, which we used to get excellent scrambled eggs and breakfast every morning after staying at the French hotel. This is some soldiers taking their baths, and these streams is very interesting. We used to bring grenades in, and a few days later we'd have to bring more in. We kept wondering, there was no enemy action, but there sure were a lot of grenades being used. We later found out that they were using them to fish. They throw them in there and would stun the fish, and they'd have a fish. This young lady was the girlfriend or wife of one of the Mao or Hmong majors that was the officer in charge of this particular camp. They really took care of our helicopter pilots because we were their ticket out of there. And she's bringing me green tea with sugar and cream in it. This is a scene at Site 36. In the early days that I was there, they were using these, I believe the Air Force called them Huskies, very powerful but very short-ranged helicopters that you can see they have an intermeshing rotor, which although powerful, the rotors swept rather low to the ground, made them a little dangerous. This is a Russian quote version of the U.S. C-47 and their helicopter. I forget the designation, but in the early days up in Laos, there was really a air rush, if you will, as well as an Air America. The pilots drank and ate and slept together, and then in the morning they took out in a common air corridor, and they went to their side and we went to our side, and coming back in it was the same type of thing. It was an odd situation. They finally got too expensive for them and they just abandoned it. This is a water buffalo, which is really the tractor, if you will, and the workhorse. Provided milk, meat, and motive power to plow their rice paddies. This is a Royal, an English helicopter with a turbine, and this is in Vientiane during a flood that they had out there. They used helicopters, fixed wing, you name it, from the various embassies, and we provided a rescue effort and distributed food and medicines to the area. This is a missionary up on the Plaine de Bouvans, just east of Pak Se in the very southern part of Laos, and he is cocking a native crossbow. We used to land in this field, and his wife cooked us many nice meals, desserts, and we used to trade them some of our canned goods. I thought this was an interesting picture here. I believe that's my wife's hand, but I can't recall for sure. Feeding this monkey a 7-Up. It's occurred to me to send this to the 7-Up people and see if they'd be interested in using it in one of their advertisements. This is a gecko. These climbed. This is the outside of my house in Udorn, Thailand, and this is a large gecko. And there was a smaller set of geckos that, and these under the lights you could expect to see dozens of these. The bigger ones ate the little ones as well as insects. This is Captain Wayne Knight, who was the chief pilot, delivering Santa Claus to the Air America compound. Notice how nice these aircraft are kept. They're clean. I just couldn't say too much about the maintenance. I don't know who Santa Claus was. I guess I've got these pictures transposed. There's Santa Claus getting out, and again, Wayne Knight is the pilot there. Notice the landing gear on this. This is anti-ground resonance landing gear. As I recall, we only had one aircraft with the old type landing gear, which was susceptible to ground resonance, and I did get into that one time and had to pull it off the ground and keep it from disintegrating. This is a typical mountain outpost that we resupplied. You can see the Laotian flag there, the trenches, and obviously I've taken this from the helicopter pad that's carved out. As they would take a hill, generally the first thing they did was get a pad in there so that we could resupply them. This is in Luang, Prabang, and it's I'm up on a hilltop at a Buddhist temple, and I'm about ready to pound their bell there. This is at Site 36. There's a Helio Courier that's just landed. The rice paddy that I'm standing in, this place was overrun on a periodic basis there. We used to, for a while there, we used to stay up there, and then they got overrun it so regular that they quit letting us stay there. But all these buildings up in there are made from the gas that we transported up in there. They'd split the barrels and use it as a steel siding for the buildings. This is Site at 20, and the aircraft is in the fuel pits. The chalet is off to the left of the picture, and I'm standing about in the position where the hospital was. All our fuel was carried in these 55-gallon drums, and I'd hate to guess how much the final cost does after it was transported that far. But nothing was wasted on these barrels. I mean, they they would take these sharp knives, split them, and use them to build their buildings. Generally, we could depend on, it was all pumped. We used to pump the fuel right through a chamois, which will separate any water out of it. I mean, this is right out of Terry and the Pirates. Generally, you could get the native people there to do the pumping if you traded them a little something. This is a pilot that I was training, and he happened to be setting up the refueling for us. This is in southern Laos, and this was a I guess you'd say a CIA training camp for the Nung, which was a Chinese really out of Chiang Kai-shek's era that had moved into Burma, and we used them as mercenaries. They're extremely effective fighters, and this particularly pad there, you would not know that there was anything there when you came in except for the runway alongside of it. This is a site of Long Chin or 20 alternate again, and note the fields there that are cleared. They used a slash and burn agriculture. They would cut the bamboo and trees and so on, and then burn them, and that created the smoky period. This is the approach into that. This is a C-123 at Site 36, dropping ammunition, or hard rice as we called it, and you can see my rotor blade as I took this picture. The kickers would kick this right out the back of the aircraft. Here's another. This one here looks like a DC-2. An interesting thing is you could drop rice if you would take about half of it out of the sack, redo the sack, and put it inside another sack. You could drop it from quite a high altitude, and it would not burst, or if it did, it would be self-contained in the second bag. The parachutes are coming down with the ammunition. We would get the local populace there would collect them and then stack them, and then of course the helicopters and other aircraft would redistribute them to the outlying pads. It's another shot with some of them just about ready to touch down. Looks like this might be the start of the smoky season. I see a fire down there where somebody is obviously clearing an area to plant rice. They used to plant what they call a hill rice over there. It's not the paddy rice that many of you might think of. This is some of the ammunition and food that's being collected and piled neatly. Here's Herb Baker and Chuck Frady. The food here was just excellent. If at all possible, you tried to make it back to our chalet at the end of the day. This was one of the nicer upcountry places to stay. I have not made it back here due to weather and one thing or another, and slept out in a field where the enemy was relatively close. This is a scene after you left Udorn. You flew northward for about 30-40 miles around Nong Khai. You came to the Mekong River, crossed over that, and that was important because when you crossed the Mekong, where our pay shot up because then we got what we called P-pay. This was the lowlands here, 150, 200-foot trees, as we and you can see the mountains that we worked up into to the north there. This was the very first mission that I went on with as a new Air America pilot. The pilot that I was flying with was Steve Stevens, and this Thai pilot flying this T-28 had run out of fuel, and like most maintenance things, Air America had a contract to repair, and they just wasted nothing. The reason I'm taking this picture, we were having trouble getting this enough power to lift this off, so I got out to take my 180 pounds out of the picture, and it gave me the opportunity to take these pictures. There's several pictures here, and as you can see, we never did get this aircraft frame off. We kept removing one thing after another, but we never did get it light enough where the H-34 would pick it up. But it was not for not trying. Should mention this aircraft had 3 tanks, the forward being self-sealing. The center and aft tank were not. And in our flying around there where the enemy tended to shoot at us, that self-sealing tank was quite a handy feature. These aircraft were ex-Marine type helicopters. I flew this same aircraft in the Navy with a slightly different designation. I was in anti-submarine, and I really liked the Marine versions quite a bit better because they had better radios and they didn't have all the sonars and stuff that we carried in the Navy version. This is a typical street scene. Again, this is in Udorn, and you can see everything was pretty much of an open air type market, including their restaurants. Just a tremendous variety of fruits and vegetables. Anything that had a thick skin on I liked because they were awfully nice to take on our trips with us. Most pilots carried a duffel bag full of canned goods that they used to survive during their upcountry. Earlier in the tape I mentioned the pilot that had shot down an aircraft. This is a Russian, I believe the designation was an AN-22. They use it as a crop duster. It's a real bush hog type aircraft. The Vietnamese had 3 of these that they sent again our Site 85. They modified it to drop bombs and also fire rockets. And it's interesting to note that we had pilots up on 85 at the time they attacked. Phil Goddard being one that I remember, and Phil was out there while these bombs were dropping, firing a .38 pistol into them, and there's some speculation that he holed one and caused it to lose fuel, but that was a rather exciting day there when these 3 aircraft came out of the clouds and attacked that. This is basically somewhere around a 2.75 rocket that they fired, and they were firing these and dropping those, probably 25, 30-pound bombs out through the bottom of this thing. All 3 of them were lost. We had the one helicopter shoot one down, and the other ones were holed sufficiently that they crashed. We used an H-46, such as you see here, H-46 or 47, can't recall. That picked that plane out. This scene here happens to be down in Vientiane again during that flood that they were using for rescue. This is also the aircraft that was called in to take that T-28 out that we were working so diligently to get out of the rice paddy. This is a typical resupply mission. You can see the ammunition, food, and so on that we brought in. One thing of note there, and you'll see this in one of the later pictures, I believe, is that if you want to see a helicopter depart in a rapid manner, is if they fired an outgoing 105 or 75 millimeter cannon that they had, because of course we could not tell if it was coming inbound or outbound rounds, and we didn't wait around to assess it. You can barely see this. This was one of the early flights that I made, and you can see that they're firing the cannon off and hitting the hill there. You can see if you look real carefully, you can see it. This is up near Luang, Prabang, and it's a typical flying scene. You can see the agriculture. I had a very interesting trip on this one. My flight mechanic and I, Bill Goodwin, were coming up on a position and that we were supposed to resupply. It was abandoned, so we cruised out the edge and we're looking for the people, thinking that they had relocated, made a lazy turn around the end of one of them, and as I came out of it, I smelled aviation fuel. I had my flight mechanic check to make sure that somebody didn't have an open container of fuel, because they used it to start fires. Then we spotted the position that we were looking for, which had moved probably 2-3 miles. We landed there, and my flight mechanic's eyes got about as big as saucers, because we were holed about 5 times in that lazy little turn there. The enemy let us have it, and we were leaking fuel quite badly and had to fly back on the forward tank to get back to Luang Prabang. This is one of the tallest mountains in Laos. This is about somewhere around 9,200 feet. It's really the tallest mountain in there, and if you were 10 feet, you could just about miss everything in the whole country. This is a typical scene, you know, with the rain clouds. The position that we were looking for could be anywhere in there, and Air America pilots, I mean, they were the best at finding small pads, and as far as pilotage navigation, it was just fantastic. Air Force couldn't believe how we could find these pads. This is an abandoned position, and you can see that it's pretty well, they've been doing a lot of fighting around there. It's kind of scarred with bomb craters and one thing or another. We had 2 schools of thought over there. We had the high flyers and the low flyers. One thing it didn't take me long to figure out was that the low flyers tended to have a lot more holes in their aircraft. I was pretty much of a very, very high flyer. Come in over the pad, auto-rotate vertically down, figuring that at least our friendly people controlled some of the land around there. Of course, the alternative was to be very low and very fast, and sometimes you didn't have the option. This is in southern Laos, typical position down there. This was slightly northeast of Pak Se, out over toward the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which was, of course, was one of our primary missions, was to interdict and stop this traffic going down into Vietnam. Notice the dust cloud where I've just taken off there. This is a Site 20, and you can see the chalet along the runway and so on there. The flying over there was just absolutely beautiful. You know, the greens and literally, when they said flying is hours and hours of boredom, punctuated by moments of stark terror, this adequately described the flying in Laos. There's some sort of strikes going on in this hill. You can just barely see where there's a puff of smoke there right in the center of the picture above one of the mountains. I don't know if that's aircraft or whether it's 105 firing. I have the feeling that that was 105 up near 36 on one of my very early missions there. These are elephants. You can see them right in the center of the picture. Spotted them. They were literally almost pink, and I couldn't help but want to take a picture of them. The terrain over there was so steep that if you auto-rotated, I mean, it was going to be an iffy thing if you're going to walk away from it. You can see that even though the hills are not very tall, they're extremely steep. This again is, we're approaching a pad here, dead ahead. Probably the hardest time to navigate over there was during the smoky season when they were burning for their crop planting. You couldn't see anything horizontally. All you could do was about look down, and again, the pilots over there just got extremely good at knowing where they were and adjusting for that. This is a typical position here. This is a position that we're about to land. You can see I'm approaching at a high angle, and I don't know if you can make it out, but there's a signal on the ground there that they lay out with cloth panels. And these were supposed to change every day, and if you went into a pad without the proper signal, you were really taking your life in your hands, as well as your crew, because these pads were overrun regularly, and we had at least one or two pilots that were captured when they landed, you know, with the wrong signal there, and the enemy had taken it over, and they were captured on landing. This is west of Site 85, and the enemy was on the move and chasing our people out to the west, and we've set up a defensive coordinator there, and we're slaughtering water buffalo to take to the troops on the hill. This is a Laotian version of a harvest store, if you will, where they stored their crops off the ground. I don't know how well they protected against the rats over there, which were quite large, but this is their granary, and this was somewhere in the area of northeast of Pak Se there. This is another site. You can see the T-28 with the Laotian flag on it. Again, it was an aircraft that was hit in a strike mission and made it back, and subsequently crashed it on the emergency landing there. This Site 36 there, the enemy came in one night, took over an outpost just about the ridge line there of the rice paddies, and turned a 57 recoilless rifle against us, and happened to be up there and went right through the building we were staying in. This is a 75 millimeter pack howitzer, which we used to transport. And again, you can see they had orders not to fire these when we were sitting on the pads, but they didn't always follow that. This is a hotel that we stayed in down in the southern part of Laos. Can't remember if that was Savannah Khet or what, but we used to, the pilots and crew used to stay in there. I darn near got electrocuted in this building. I came out of the shower, I slipped, and their wiring is such that they use 2 bare wires, and my hands crossed both of them, and I'm standing in water. Luckily, their power wasn't that great, but it did shock me. This is another typical pad resupply mission. You can see my rotor blade there. This is a Laotian village here. One thing, there were so many ethnic groups over there. Basically, you had the Hmong, or Mayo as we called them, but there were just hundreds of different tribes up there with their own ethnic groups, and it was always a case of trying to win new people into our side. And this was a new pad that we'd gone in with a different ethnic group, and of course the main thing that what they wanted were the young men to draft into the Army. This is a site somewhere in the neighborhood of southeast of Site 20, and a very pastoral sign. They had cattle, and as I understand it, one of Tony Poe's wives came from this area. I say one because he may have had more than one. This was south of Site 85, and they had a ring of mountains in. They had just carved this pad, and we had come in there. We were the first helicopter in there, and they're resupplying there. It's also interesting to note that this same area just south of 85, Phil Goddard was working there one day, working out of a lower pad, and an Air Force H-3 came in with a crew that was looking for French survey markers, and they called and asked where this certain pad was, and Phil told them, and he suggested to them that they might want to bring their helicopter down where he was working, and he would transport their people up to the pad, which was very small, and on the top he was rebuffed by the Air Force pilot, who said he didn't need any damn America pilot to do his mission for him. Well, about 10 minutes later, Phil was pulling the survivors off the hill for them. The pad was just too small for the H-3, and plus the pilots just didn't have the mountain landing skills that Air America pilots had. They just didn't do it as much. This is another typical sign. Site, you can see the Laotian flag there. In the previous screen there, that was one of the mountain women. They carried heavy loads on their backs and marched all over those hills. Some sort of airstrikes going on not too far from this pad that we're at, or it could be artillery. Just can't tell. Interesting to note, even though this is Southeast Asia and you think of jungle, I, on more than one occasion, got Christmas trees for Air America up in there. This is Site 85. This had a radar sight on top of it, and I should mention that these pictures have all been looked at by the CIA and the Air Force, they apparently had some missing people on there. There was a radar site that did a lot of the controlling over North Vietnam, and of course this was a prime site that the North Vietnamese wanted to wipe out. Here I'm approaching, there was a village, a lower village, and then there's one on top, supposed to be impregnable. Went all through the French Indochina War, and the North Vietnamese were never able to take it. I made a mission that very seldom do we ever fly at night over there, because you might as well just unstrap and step over the side because you weren't going to make it. We left 20 early in the morning, about 3 o'clock, and we had 3 helicopters. I was a flight leader on that, and we met 2 Air Force H-3s, and we went in right at first light, got the people out of there, and then headed back. Interesting to note that the Air Force pilot in one of the H-3s said that he thought there was somebody there left, and he wanted me to go back in. I suggested that maybe his armored helicopter might be a little better choice to go back in, and he went back in, and then by then the North Vietnamese were alerted, and they shelled it. He was lucky to get off. This is the lower bow. There was also a heliocordier strip there, and we also used it for helicopters. Not a smile in the crowd. Wherever a helicopter landed, you could be sure we could attract a crowd here. This was a village that we were trying to, recruit some soldiers out of. There's just not a whole lot of young men around. This is the most young man I've seen, and you can see that they have not, they're a tribe that has not been fully integrated into this whole warfare thing, because you're seeing some young men there of, soldiering age, if you will. It's interesting to note that these tribes, there were just so many of them over there. This was somewhere north of the Plain de Jars. I had landed. I couldn't make it into a pad, and darkness was closing in. I had to land in a rice paddy, and I spent the night with these people. We slept in the helicopter, but we were only about 40 yards from their house. These girls wouldn't look at me here. Notice every tribe has their own unique colors and bands and one thing or another that apparently they can tell each other apart. This young girl was, I believe, a princess of one of the tribes. Again, notice a very distinctive coloring in the bands. Everything is for that particular tribe. You notice you can see one on the left of the picture there, and that is sterling or silver jewelry that she's got around her neck. They used to make this out of the French piastres, which was similar to our silver dollars. This young fella, I believe, was going to be a teacher. This is at Site 36. Nice young man. It's interesting to note that many of these Mao, Hmong tribesmen, I live in Mount Airy, North Carolina, and we have a rather extensive contingent of Hmong in our community, and North Carolina also has some other sites that has rather extensive, say 10, 20,000 that have relocated. The terrain is not totally unlike where they came from. This starved out individual here was in Hong Kong. This is in southern Laos, where I'm on a mission taking, one of the things that we did over there was USAID was trying to win the hearts and minds of these people, and we were setting up schools, and I'm taking in supplies to set up the schools as well as teachers. Couple little native boys here. These people were so tough over there. Americans, when shot, tend to go into shock rather easily. I have transported these people with bullet wounds through their chest, sucking chest wound, and they've got their finger in it, and they're fully conscious and talking to you. I mean, it's something else. This is in southern Laos. It's interesting to note I had taken off from this position, and my left hatch on my helicopter had come off in that green area right at the end of the runway at the north side. And I came around, and I was about ready to, I landed in the at the end of the runway and was about to get out and go get, and they came out and wouldn't let me proceed. But I quickly understood the word mines. Here's Mike and I back with our rifle. He was having an awful time trying to figure out how that M2 carbine worked. I guess the enemy was coming up over the hill. He probably would have learned quick enough. Notice the fuel tank covers off, getting ready to refuel the aircraft. This is Luang Prabang, and right there in the center of the picture, if you recall earlier, I was banging on a bell. Right at the top of that picture, that's where that bell was located. They had a French restaurant and hotel that we used to stay in, and really had some good meals there. In fact, some of the meals that we got on the town cooked by a Chinese were just totally excellent. This is one of the native women carrying her pack, and I'll tell you, you can see she's got no shoes on. They walked up and down those hills, and I guarantee you that there wasn't anybody that could keep up with them from the Western Hemisphere. Some more women out harvesting firewood or whatever. One of the things that USAID did was we took in hybrid seed corn. And now they had corn over there, but the darn ears were about 4 inches long, all withered. Well, they couldn't believe it when they planted our hybrid corn to get these nice ears about 10, 12 inches long, just beautiful. The only problem was that they would then use that seed the next year, and every year it regressed back to where seed corn is interesting. If you keep using the same seed, it regresses back to its parent stock. You can see our duffel bags in the floor there. We carried changes of clothes, and most of the fellows carried a satchel of canned goods, as I mentioned earlier. This is another scene in Luang Prabang. Those aircraft we saw earlier, the T-28s that were destroyed out there, we were in the French hotel when we heard of this attack. I remember Herb Baker was with it, and the rest of us all wanted to go the other direction, and Herb wanted to go out and confront the sappers. And I think he eventually did. He borrowed a Jeep or something and went out there. This is an aircraft 34 that was knocked down. Larry Wilmot was the pilot, and we were taking troops into this landing thing, and Dick Casterland happened to be flying in on low, and he noticed all these fellows laying in ambush, and he made the mistake of going back and checking them out, and he got holed and barely missed getting killed. I shoot, there were rounds that went within inches of his head. Larry Wilmot was on final, and he was shot down, killed about 10 people. Steve Stevens went in and confirmed that everybody was dead, and from this shot I'm considerable altitude above them because there's enemy all around there. You have to realize these people are totally fascinated by helicopter. There can be nobody in that country that hasn't ridden in a helicopter. These people don't drive. They don't do anything except walk around, and they're totally enamored of our mechanical thing. Notice they're filling the barrels up here as well as washing. And we would take these barrels of water up to the top of the mountain. Of course, if they were going to stay up there, we had to resupply them with food, water, ammunition, so on. If we weren't in there taking it, I guarantee you within a day they would walk off that mountain. This is one of our hard-working flight mechanics here, taking a breather. He looks totally relaxed to me. This was in southern Laos, where we were, I was waiting to go on a mission where we were going to use the helicopters, but we took a trip in the Porter to recon where we were going in. And we were just killing some time here waiting for everything to gel. This engine was the 1820, which in my Navy career I flew in helicopters. I also flew in S-2Fs. The same engine was used in the T-28s. This was just a real workhorse type engine. Interesting, in all my helicopter hours, I never had one of these fail, but in flying Navy fixed wing, I've had a multitude of them fail. In one case, losing 2 of them at one time and ditching down in the Caribbean just outside Guantanamo Bay. This flight mechanic here was Filipino. We had basically had Thai, Filipino, American, a wide variety and background of our flight mechanics. This is Vin Chin. Again, this was during the flood where we were doing rescue work. This was taken in southern Laos and just represents the entrance to a typical Laotian dwelling. Should point out that we had the lowland Lao and you had the highland or Mayo mountain tribes. They didn't get along real well. These helicopters, I think Charlie White's was the pilot, but he had one of the things that you were to check was the vent for the battery. Well, shoot, with all the time that I've flown those things, I never found anything wrong. Well, Charlie had one that had the vent was clogged and it exploded and blew side of the helicopter out. This is one of the young ladies. They trained quite a few of the Laotian young girls there as nurses, and I believe this was one of the nurses that was servicing one of the small towns. That monkey sure does like that 7-Up. On the road to from Bangkok to Udorn, it was a 2-lane road, and these big trucks had the contracts to transport aviation fuel and jet fuel back and forth to the main air bases at Karat and Udorn, and there were just some tremendous wrecks. When we'd go on R&R down to Bangkok, it was not uncommon to see 2 or 3 of these overturned, burned, and so on. This is in southern Laos. It was interesting. We had gone into this village to assess a 105 airstrike that had missed the target and bombed the wrong village, and they dropped 750-pound bombs in there. We had Air Force representatives, and I walked with them and looked down the hole where one of these bombs had gone and not detonated, and I could look down and see the fins of it. And then one of the representatives mentioned that these were delayed bombs, and they did not know what the delays were. It could be anywhere from hours to minutes to days. I promptly left the scene, went to my helicopter, and moved another 100 yards back. The previous picture there was they're boiling and getting salt out of the ground. This is the final shot of our Civil Air Transport building in Taipei. With the entrance. I should note that I was shot down. Well, I can't say shot down. I was sitting on the ground when I was hit by a heavy weapon of some sort when we were the first helicopter into this pad that we'd recaptured a airfield that had switched sides 2 or 3 times, and my crew chief James Hope was very, very badly wounded in that. I've just added this right onto the Air America. As I say, I flew in the Navy. These are S2Fs. We're flying off a carrier, and we have a Mad Boom extended, and I just, this is a real old type camera, but I always did like this shot here, and I've just tacked it onto the end of this. I flew about 2,000 hours in these type aircraft. Was one of these that the engines quit, and I ended up ditching in Guantanamo Bay. That concludes this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I would like to amplify, I just mentioned briefly earlier that I had been hit with a heavy caliber weapon just south of Plain de Jars, probably 30-40 miles east of Sam Tong, or Lima Site 20. We were hit. I immediately, I didn't realize we were hit. I thought it was very close. I immediately added power to take off. Instantaneously, there was fire all around, so I reduced the collective. The aircraft promptly rolled to the right because the right landing gear had been shot off. I got out, ran down the hill about 30-40 yards and hid behind a large tree and listened to every one of those 1,000 rounds of AK-47 ammunition cook off. I could see bodies up in the helicopter, but the interesting thing is that sucker ran when there was nothing left except the engine up there. Where the fuel was coming, I have no idea, but it would just about quit and then it would burp. Finally, we came, I was south, the aircraft was on the pad, and then just about 30-40 yards north of there was the position that we were resupplying. I stayed where I was because I was afraid of mines. Eventually, the friendlies came down, got me, and like I say, I thought my flight mechanic, James Hope, was killed in there. And when he got to the aircraft and looked over the hill, he was down there about 20-30 yards, and we differ to this day as to exactly what happened, but he claims he ran down the hill. I don't know if he ran down or was blown down, but he was very, very badly wounded, but conscious, and we carried him up and we sat in a 2,000-pound bomb crater waiting for rescue. It's interesting to note that he was conscious enough to know, in spite of his grievous wounds, that I told him we had rescue planes coming in for us, and there was a porter out there orbiting, and he recognized that was a porter, and I was lying to him because it wasn't a helicopter. However, I assured him that in a short time there would be a helicopter coming in, and sure enough, an H-34 came in, flown by J.J. McCauley, who took us to Site 20, and then they had a caribou waiting for Jim, and he went to Bangkok, and then he went to the Philippines, and then back into the States. Jim has had the last rites pronounced over him 3 times, because when this fire enveloped the aircraft, he ingested fire into his lungs, and or at least very hot air, and he kept getting pneumonia. But he's recovered pretty much, and Jim and I are extremely close friends to this day, been involved in a variety of business ventures and one thing or another, and we see and talk with each other quite frequently. I hope you've enjoyed this tape, and I wish all of you the best of luck, and that's the end.